favor. Abortion is a very controversial issue that in recent years took on much relevance due to the popularization of the feminist movement, which has long fought for legalization in our country. This generated debates in which science is used as a tool to support different positions. These debates open a much bigger discussion about our philosophical and ideological positions and whether they influence the way scientific knowledge is obtained. In order to answer these questions, we must analyze how science manages to find knowledge and whether it is relevant to the discussion. In short, we must find out what is the place of science in addressing this. Fertilization occurs when the sperm joins the egg, which can happen hours or days after insemination. But fertilization is not the only requirement for forming a human life, because the embryo cannot develop on its own. Another point that is considered the implantation of the embryo in the uterus that occurs between 7 and 14 days. One of the arguments that appear in front of this is that if the condition for an embryo to become a person is a pregnant body, then it would have the right to decide if the gestation will continue or not. Another moment to consider is gastrulation, which is when the three embryonic layers that allow the formation of the embryo's organs are formed, and it's the point at which the embryo can no longer divide through form to win. Aesthetics are very important when it comes to developing public policies, and this case is not an exception. The number of abortions, the project of their growth, it decreases or case the law is applied, are the key data when talking about this topic. In Argentina, despite not having reliable data because most of them are performed clandestinely, it is estimated that between 370,000 and 520,000 abortions are performed every day, which represents the first cause of maternal death. Looking at this data, it can be seen that this problem is very, very serious. Likewise, not only it is demonstrated that in countries where abortion is illegal, the rate of abortions remains relatively constant. Another issue involving science is the health of the pregnant woman. In mental health with post-abortion syndrome, a pseudoscientific term that is often cited in the debate but was contradicted by a study that shows in the short term people who are denied abortion suffer more increased anxiety, but in the long terms the results shows that there would not be many psychological differences between people who were able to abort and those who were not. It is also involved in physical health. Of the more than 700 citizen presentations called the hearings, many have been by researchers and university students. And it is no less important that career scientists who study different aspects of this subject, they are in field of legal sciences, sociology, molecular biology, genetics, epidemiologics, and also neuroscience, have expressed themselves with different arguments that tilt the balance that were recognizing the right of women and pregnant women to decide voluntarily terminate their pregnancies within 14 weeks. There are no reliable data of the number of abortions, but in fact, since we recovered democracy, more than 3,000 women have died from unsafe abortions, and more than 45,000 have been admitted to public hospitals. It is clear of clandestine abortion affects the right to life of the most vulnerable woman considered as a legal market and ignores what happens in reality on a daily basis. Against an abortion is not the voluntary termination of pregnancy, but a simple and cruel act of terminating a human life. This is not said by the bishops, who have already presented their campaign comparing the protection of lynxes with that of children, but by a group of scientists. This statement is one of the 12 points included in the manifesto signed by more than 500 scientists, professors, and intellectuals from different branches of medicine, humanities, and social sciences against the reform of the abortion legislation. They argue against the report of the Committee of Experts appointed by the Ministry of Equality that points out the possibility that a girl between 16 and 17 years old can decide whether to have an abortion without parental consent. Far from being an achievement of a woman's right, an abortion law without limitations would hold the woman solely responsible for an act of violence against the life of her own child, says the text entitled In the Face of a Government Initiative for Abortion Term Law. Scientific arguments. They claim that what they are demanding is a correct interpretation of the data of the science in relation to human life. In this sense, they affirm that there is ample scientific evidence that life begins at the moment of fertilization. They also add that the zygote is the first corporal reality of the human being, and that the embryo from the fertilization until the 8th week and the fetus from the 8th week are the first phases of the development of a new human being. Both, although they need the mother for their development, are not part of the substance of any organ of the latter. Furthermore, they point out that the biological nature for the human embryo and the fetus is independent of the way in which it has originated, whether it comes from natural reproduction or the product of assisted reproduction. The post-abortion syndrome. The signatories consider it as necessary that the woman takes a free decision after an informed and precise knowledge of the procedure and the consequences of having an abortion. In sense, they speak of the post-abortion syndrome. They say that women who have abortions suffer from depression, feeling of guilt, recurring nightmares, behavioral disorders, loss of self-esteem, etc. The scientists, professors, and intellectuals who have added to the manifesto ask that the freedom of objection of the doctors should be respected.
Talking about coverage of anti-abortion legislation.
Late-term abortion.
Sweeping new restrictions on abortion.
At least 15 states have enacted abortion restrictions or outright bans in 2019.
The spotlight is back on abortion, which means politicians on both sides of the aisle are spinning facts to support their side of the debate. So what's right and what's flat out wrong? Anti-abortion advocates have claimed abortion is more dangerous than ever before. Live Action told us they were editorializing, and they deleted the original tweet. They said their judgment was based on the fact that there's limited data about complications associated with abortions. But overall, the mortality rate for a woman having an abortion is very low. Now, abortions have less short-term risk than carrying a pregnancy to term. Abortion rights advocates paint a bleak picture of the future for women if Roe v. Wade is overturned.
This is a very dangerous time for women's health in our country. Before Roe versus Wade, thousands of people died every year because they didn't have access to safe legal abortion.
Abortion was recorded as the official cause of death for thousands of women in the 1930s and 40s, but the stigma associated with the procedure meant those numbers aren't concrete.